Let's get into our next interview. We have in our studios today J. Mark Lawrence, who is an attorney and running for Yamhill County Circuit Court Judge. Do you go by Mark?
I do. Good
Mark,
morning.
Welcome to KLYC.
Good to be here.
Why run for Circuit Court Judge?
I think we need good, qualified people, solid people to be a judge, and that's why I'm running.
Why vote for you for a Circuit Court Judge?
Well, I think that we all want a judge that knows the law, that's fair, that's willing to take the time to hear the litigants, to actually hear the arguments, and to make a wise decision according to the law. I think that 25 years experience as a trial attorney, starting out working in the DA's office for John Collins when he was the district attorney. I've spent over 10 years in family law, divorces, adoptions, those kinds of things, and in private practice doing civil rights litigation as well as criminal defense law. Really does make a difference. I think it makes a difference how long somebody's worked and the different areas they've worked in, because judges, it's one thing not everybody knows, judges, they handle everything. They handle probates to criminal cases to civil litigation, and so a good broad base of experience is a good thing to have. Hopefully that experience leads to insight, wisdom, temperament, and somebody who's ready to handle the job.
Now, one of the things that I like about interviewing a judge as he's running for office before he gets elected is, in some ways, you're a little bit freer to talk about trends and so on and so forth than you would be after you're on the bench, so to speak. What kinds of trends that are occurring in the courtroom that you're concerned about as a practicing attorney going into a judge? Is there anything that you're concerned about going forward?
Well, actually, in Yamhill County, and let me address that specifically, Judge Collins and the other judges have really worked hard not to turn this into one of the big counties where security is so tight you never get to see a judge, where people come in and things happen so quickly they honestly don't know what's going on. It takes an attorney to interpret what's going on. And that has not happened in this county. And I would certainly work to make sure that didn't happen, that we have a small enough community, citizens can come in and see a judge in an appropriate time. You can't have ex parte contact, but it's very open. The judges tend to take the time that's necessary for the litigants to understand what's going on. And so I think it's actually a good trend that's going on here in this county, as opposed to what may be happening in other places.
That's one thing that we've noticed when we bought the radio station is folks in Yamhill County, they still want to be, and the word local is not a bad word, they want to be very local, tied to this community, and they're not at all interested in becoming a big city. That is something that was told to us very clearly when we came to town, and it's still being said today. So you agree with that?
I agree with that, and in the courts as well.
Are there any changes you would make if elected to circuit court?
So one thing that you need to understand is the person who is elected is going to be the newest judge, and so they don't walk in and tell the other judges that have been there for a decade or two how they're going to do things. And so I look at it more like it's somebody that's going to come in and participate in the discussion with those other judges. They've thought about it, they've worked on the system a long time, and so it's being part of the conversation and having input. So there are some things that I think would be a good idea. I think that it would be good for us to fast track important cases like domestic violence. We've seen that in other jurisdictions those kinds of cases can be tried within 90 days, almost without exception, which is good for the victim. It's actually good for the defendant. If that person is guilty, then they can get on with what has to happen with them. And if they're not guilty, then their family's not separated for a year or better that it can take now. And it's good for society because we handle the things that are important to us quickly. I would add to that child victim cases. The younger the child, the more you forget. And so those cases could go to trial in 90 to 180 days. And again, it would be better for everybody concerned in the process if we did that. So that's one thing I would have a talk with the court about. I think that we could have a pro se family law, pro se meaning representing yourself, because over half the cases that come into the court in family law, there's no attorney involved. So there are procedural things that you need to take a little bit more time with. There are, I mean, not just procedural things, but substantive things as well. And so you got to take. I'm hearing in the background me talking. It's like, that's scary.
I can go turn that down if you like.
No, that's fine. But I think a court designed to help people that are not represented in a family law situation, because there's nothing more important than that.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of courts, we've been very active in the veterans community, and some jurisdictions have what are called veterans courts.
Yes.
Let me explain quickly what veterans courts are. Veterans, especially some veterans that are dealing with PTSD, which is a big issue for people dealing in Iraq and Afghanistan. They have multiple deployments. They're changed as people, the way they think, the way they react to certain things, even a McDonald's bag on the street. You know, in Iraq, Afghanistan, they could hide an IED.
Right.
And so sometimes there's a trigger point for these guys and gals that they normally wouldn't do. And so sometimes something happens and they react out of instinct, and maybe they're dealing with some issues. And so there are some municipalities that are saying we really need to kind of handle the veterans differently, because if nothing else, we need to thank them for their service and understand that maybe they need help reacclimating to society. So the Veterans Courts issue, do we have one here, and should we?
We don't have one here, but Judge Collins actually has looked at that issue, and there's been an awful lot of research on that particular issue. We do, and the legislature has said that we need to treat veterans differently, and that we need to consider their service as they're processed through the system. I think that ultimately we are going to have a veterans court here. This court is very supportive of treatment courts, and so veterans is one of those, because you are absolutely correct, and it goes back to, by the way the research says, back to Vietnam, when our soldiers would get off the helicopter and not necessarily shoot at the enemy who was shooting at them. And so the training changed so that there's much more of a stimulus response. And I mean, we train these people to go protect us and to kill people. Mm-hmm. And then we fly them home shortly after they've been, in a combat zone, and their reality is affected, and they see things, and they're concerned about things that, and they respond accordingly. That the average citizen doesn't. So I suspect we will have a veterans court before very long, and I am supportive of that. All
righty. Evidence-based sentencing. I've heard a lot of county commission candidates talk about evidence-based sentencing. We're looking at making the dollar stretch as far as we can. One of the things, don't take this the wrong way, but one of the things we would like to do is put you out of a job.
Sure.
Because if we can decrease the amount of people that go through the criminal justice system, then society benefits.
Absolutely.
So one of the things evidence-based sentencing is doing is trying to reduce the recidivism rate or repeat offender rate.
Right.
Let's address that.
No, it's a terrific thing that we're doing. And Yamhill County, again, is sort of taking a leadership position. In fact, we were one of, I believe, 6 jurisdictions that really started that several years ago. And so we've been doing things differently in Yamhill County for a while. And so what we want to look at, and the court should always look first to public safety. But within that context, we can look at rehabilitation, deterrence, sometimes punishment just outright has to happen, and isolation, where somebody just isn't going to do well in society and they have to be removed from society. And so evidence-based decision-making and sentencing simply says, based upon this person's unique individual circumstances, what are the chances that they're amenable to treatment? What are the chances that they will recidivate, that they'll come back, be back in the system? And what kind of programs or education or remedial process needs to happen so that it's most effective for them? And balance that with the needs of punishment and holding people accountable as well. But it's not, the old thinking was, you do X and we're going to pound you, we're going to do this to you. And what we found is we've incarcerated twice as many people as just about anybody else on the planet, and it hasn't necessarily made a huge difference. So we're trying to be smarter about it now.
Remember the old cop show Beretta? You
Yeah.
do the crime, you do the time.
Right.
Depending on the individual, in order to reduce repeat offender rate, sometimes you got to take a look at you got to take a look at what's going on with them, the crime, and decide how to proceed in either treating or incarcerating or both.
Right. And I mean, ultimately, again, you got to keep your eye on what's most important, which is protection of society. So you're going to devise plans that are going to protect society. So it's not just giving somebody another chance or putting them in some kind of program instead of punishing them. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about holding people accountable. But if somebody's willing to change, somebody's willing to make amends, somebody's willing to pay their restitution and put somebody back in the place they were as best you can, then they're going to probably be given a chance.
What about sentencing guidelines?
Sentencing guidelines were developed to try to make things more equal across counties all through the state of Oregon. The sentencing guidelines generally are probably pretty good. It gives a judge a wide latitude. I mean, there's a presumptive sentence, and a judge can impose the presumptive sentence. If they think that more time needs to be imposed, they can do that. And if they think less time needs to be imposed, they can.
I was checking one of the things I do is check the news sites, and I can talk about this case, I think, because do you hear any cases out of Portland? Or no, you're not on the bench yet. You're still in a defense attorney.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you're not representing this individual, but there was an arrest made in, I believe it was the Portland area, the metro area, where a guy was stalking a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the public reads and hears stories or sees them on TV, and this just sends a chill down their spine. I'm trying to find the story now, but what it was a guy he was arrested and being tried. He'd essentially turned his van into a torture chamber and actually had kidnapped a woman and was torturing her, and she received critical injuries when she jumped out of the van or whatever, multiple skull fractures, and when they finally arrested him and got his van, the van had chains, duct tape. It was essentially a torture chamber on wheels.
Wow.
And from his notes and computer and whatever that they found after they arrested him, they determined that, and this first woman that he kidnapped got away. They determined that because of that and what he was putting in his notes, that the second woman probably wasn't going to be so lucky, and it was going to be very, very bad. The public sees stories like this, and they, I think, react in fear and say, oh my gosh, this
Sure.
guy is prowling the streets. And, what do you do when you get somebody like that coming before you as a judge, and you've got such, I guess evil is a word I want to use, but how do you reform a person like that?
Well, I don't know the facts of that case.
Yeah.
So let's assume that everything you said is true.
Sure.
I can't think of a better person that qualifies for what we call isolation, somebody who needs to be removed from society for as long as you can remove them from society, and for the rest of their life, if that's possible. The judge ultimately, and the jury, are responsible to keep people like that off the street. I don't see any reformation for something like that. Imagine the mindset that it takes to do something like that to another human being.
Oh, it's terrible. I found the story. You can go to the Oregonian website and find it, OregonLive.com. Kelly Swoboda was stalking women from Eugene to Portland. It turned his van into a mini torture chamber, and it's a story that's you may not have even seen the story.
I hadn't, no.
Well, so you see stories like that, and it sends chills down your spine.
It does. Now, that's probably one of 10,000. I mean, that's not your average
Sure.
case, and that's why it's a headline, and that's why it's so
Not
scary.
every van driving down the road. The Yam
Right.
van is not a torture chamber.
Right.
It's just because somebody's driving an old van might look a little scraggly. Don't
Right.
think that they're Kelly Swoboda or whatever his name is.
No, I suspect he won't be driving around again for a long time.
I suspect not. So when you're a judge and somebody comes like that before you, is it hard to I guess, distance yourself or just look at the facts and not react emotionally?
Well, actually, I mean, so the example that you gave actually
Sure.
would be an easy case.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think any of us have to think really hard to come to the conclusion that that person is not functioning well within society and probably never will. And, I mean, they had plans, not only what they'd done, but you talked about future plans.
Right.
So that's an easy case. That's the person who's going to go away for a very long time. But I do have a lot of judge friends, and I can tell you sentencing is one of the most difficult things that they do. In fact, that's the least favorite part of their job, because if you take the time to really think about and try to do what's right, it's a lot of work. And you're thinking, I have to protect society. I want to use, I don't want to spend $40,000 a year to put somebody in prison for 20 years when 10 years will do the same thing. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a $500,000 difference there almost. So, they're tough, and you have to make those judgment calls. And that's what the 4 judges we have right now, they do it every day in, day out.
How do you tell if somebody's lying to you as a judge? Somebody comes in, they look like the altar boy, and that deep down in their heart they're probably not. And how do you filter through that?
Judges are like other human beings, although they do it all the time. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, you look at the same thing you look at. You look at the nonverbals that somebody's given. You look at the consistency of what they're saying, the believability of what they're saying, what other evidence exists that is consistent or inconsistent with what they're saying. And you make an assessment. And they have to do that all the time.
Are there any things, I know you brought some notes in that you want to talk about as far as people making decisions for the next circuit court judge in Yamhill County? What do you want people to think about when they're thinking about whether to vote for you or someone else?
The next judge is going to be somebody that people trust, that they think, I've known this person, I've seen them in their public life, and I think that they're going to make the right decision. So, for example, one of the things that I talk about is the work that I've done with kids. And I, as a kid, was very fortunate to have the right influences and teachers that came along beside me and helped turn me from somebody who might be in court. And so I've worked with Rural Family Kids Camp, which is, kids that have been taken away from their parents, and it's a week up in the mountains, a camping trip that they get to go on, which is really great and good for the kids. Or working with the mock trial kids. I say kids, they're high school kids,
Sure.
Young adults, but their minds are at the peak of, interest and willingness to learn and explore and challenge themselves and put something together that they can put together. I've a couple of my mock trial kids one time wanted to debate, and Yamhill Carlton didn't have a debate team, so we got we were ordained as the Yamhill Carlton team, and so we were able to register and travel around the state that year. These kids were phenomenal. They were winning tournament after tournament, and it was hilarious because people said, "What is YC? Well, where is that?" As these little guys just kept winning, and so most recently, We the People. It's a constitutional competition. Judge Tischer and I went up and judged that this last year. And so things like that I think are important to know that it more well-rounds a person. They're not just doing the law. I love Judge Stone. He loves to get away, leaves on the weekend, goes camping, and just does something else other than thinks about cases and the law. And I think it brings him back refreshed and ready to go. So I think it's important you have some outside interest. I've taught as a defense attorney. So I was a former prosecutor, but as a defense attorney, I was asked to teach search and seizure law to some agencies. And so as a defense attorney, I taught search and seizure to Yamhill Carlton and to the Amity Police Department. And I did that because I think it's best that every role, every entity in the system is functioning well. And so the better that our police officers do in following the law, the better the system is. The better our attorneys do, both prosecutors and defense attorneys, the better the system is. And obviously, the better the judge is, the better everything is.
After you're elected to the bench, do you still have the freedom of doing that kind of training with local law enforcement, or are you more removed from it legally?
Judges can participate in CLEs, continuing legal education, to a degree, but it tends to be unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I really do mean it, it's the prosecutors and the defense attorneys tend to go to different, classes, and so judges are reluctant sometimes to choose one or the other. But in those forums where they meet together, absolutely, judges can still do that.
Society, some people think that society has gone off the rails just a bit. We talk about stories like I just talked about. We have shootings like Columbine.
Yeah.
When I graduated from high school in 1978, there's things going on in high school and in schools across this land today that I never would have dreamed of when I was in high school in the mid-'70s. What's happened? What do you think? Video games? Movies? What?
I graduated in 1979, and a friend of mine was a big hunter. And so everybody knew when whatever season it was opened, he was going to be gone for a little while. And he would pull up to school with his shotgun in the back of his truck, and nobody thought anything about it because, it would have been irresponsible to take the weapon out of school, and he didn't. And people knew that you wouldn't. I mean, that wasn't something that we even contemplated. I don't know. I can't take political positions, but I can. I think the Second Amendment is probably a good thing, and instead of disarming people like teachers at school, if somebody knew that there were weapons there, maybe they'd think twice before they brought a weapon and started acting crazy.
Right.
Because it could be stopped pretty quickly.
I big believer in the Second Amendment too, concealed carry. So I assume you're agree with that.
I do agree with that. I do. Responsible citizens. Somebody said the only way you stop a bad man with a gun is a good man with a gun. And it's unfortunate. And I mean, it's kind of crazy we're at that point because I agree with you. We shouldn't be at that point. But it is unfortunate that we have police officers at school. I don't know. I think that ultimately it probably goes back to sort of our foundation and what we're taught. And I think we need to be taught responsibility as children. It's one reason I've worked with children. I think people having a faith basis is a good thing, and it helps us, learn how to comport ourselves and that what we do matters. And so that's probably where the answer ultimately is.
So how do we get back on the rails? You mentioned you worked a lot with kids. I've heard a lot of people say that the mentoring programs are good, and they're encouraging businesses and individuals with time, and not a lot of us have a whole lot of extra time. I know myself, it's like, boy, I'm bored, I don't have anything to do. That hasn't entered my decision-making process for quite some time. But so we're all busy. But we also have kids, and I know we've all seen them, that you look at them, and I could mention names, but I won't. And you could say Johnny could either go, he could either go to the good side or the bad side. And if we could somehow engage them as society and speak into their life positively, give them some, good moral, give them, if nothing else, a role model to follow.
Sure.
Not saying, Johnny, I'm going to be your role model, but if you could give them some kind of positive interaction with an adult figure that maybe they've seldom had, might be the difference.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I think you hit it on the nose, and it's an individual thing. And so for you, it might be a kid that's interested in radio, and he will start by following you around and seeing what you do as you talk to him, during those times, which could get him fired up, which could get him focused in a direction, which could, you make a lot of decisions, and you can go one way or another in your business, and they would see, wow, he's doing the right thing, and it makes a difference. And so, we can't solve everything, but we can solve, or at least try to help what's right in front of us. And I think you hit it on the nose. That's what we can do.
We'd like to see our kids be the police officers instead of the crooks.
Exactly.
And so I would encourage you, if you're a listener, if you know, there's some mentoring programs out there. I've heard a number of people in the community talk about, we really need to look at that. I think we do. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And whatever interests the kid, there's going to be somebody that's there for them. There really is.
All right. As we close out the show here, we're coming to the end of it. J. Mark Lawrence is running for Yamhill County Circuit Court Judge. And so I look at my vote by mail ballot, which I do when I live in the state of Oregon in Yamhill County, and I look at Circuit Court Judge, and I see your name. What do you want me to think about?
Well, I want you to think about what you know about me and whether I'm somebody that you can trust. Ultimately, a judge is a reflection of the community. They're certainly not perfect, but they've done the right things. They've fought for the right issues, and I'd ask you to trust me. I won't let them down.
You personally believe in the Second Amendment.
I do.
Believe in faith-based organizations. Believe in speaking into kids' lives.
I do.
Any other issues that you would like people to know about personally, so they get kind of an idea about where you are, as an individual?
Yeah, and so judges and judge candidates have to follow pretty much the same rules, but I think judges are there to apply the law, not to make the law. Certainly at the trial court level, we don't make law. We follow the law. The legislature makes the law. The courts of appeal interpret that law, and we apply it. And so that's more of a conservative position.
But there is also a little bit of interpretation that...
there's always interpretation in the application, sure.
Right.
But I think if you go, here's a judge who knows what the law is and is going to find the facts accurately and then apply the law to the facts, he's going to get it right most of the time. And that's what I would do.
Okay. Do you have a Facebook page or website?
We do. It's Lawrence for Judge on Facebook, all one word.
Okay. If you want to hear this interview again and see what J. Mark Lawrence is, where he stands on the issues, want to hear our conversation again, you can go to our website, KLYC.us. The interview here this morning will be posted on KLYC News Channel. And here in the next few days, all of the candidate interviews we're going to be doing will be putting on the news channel, and they'll rotate with others. And so it's just like listening to a radio station. You go to KLYC.us, click on News Channel, and we have a number of long-form programs that will rotate. Or you can go to news at KLYC.us, recent interviews, and just select the one you want to listen to, click on it, and you can hear it. Mark, anything you'd like to add in closing?
No, I appreciate you doing this, and I've enjoyed being here.
Okay, well, we've enjoyed having you here, and it's nice to, again, I love talking to a judge as he's running, because I can say, okay, the public kind of wants to know what makes you tick, because they want to know who's behind the bench, and it's a good idea to, as they're casting their ballot, to give them an idea of the character of the individual that they're putting behind the bench, because they're going to interpret the laws for us, and we want to make sure that they're doing a good job. Thank you, sir, for coming in.
You bet. Thank you.
AM 1260 KLYC, and don't forget to vote.